Welcome to the Shared Path. I'm Maggie Linton. It's been 15 years since multi award winning author Michael Thomas Ford wrote his acclaimed novel, Suicide Notes. But the wait has been worth it. With his new sequel, Every Star That Falls, Michael gives us humor, tears, and compassion as he shares the life of a young man who's dealing with sexual identity and mental illness. Welcome, Michael Thomas Ford.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, Jeff's back. It's been 15 years, but really? I mean, what was going on with you other than writing, which we'll talk about?
Well, I always said I was not going to do a sequel to Suicide Notes. I don't generally do sequels because readers fall in love with these characters and they have these ideas in their head about what they want to happen to them. And so no matter what you do, someone's going to be upset, right? It's like anytime a movie sequel comes out, half the audience hates it, half the audience loves it. And so I always said, well, I'd rather people just think for themselves what happens to him. But they kept asking, and the book kept getting more and more readers over the years, which is very unusual. Books usually come and go, and sometimes they hang around, but this one just got bigger every year, and eventually it became unavoidable that I had to tell people what happens next. So I
Oh,
did.
it's not like you haven't been doing anything because you do continue to write. When I said 75 novels, I said, oh my goodness. And as we were talking about beforehand, I'm good friends with David Baldacci. And one of the things I said to him one day, I said, if you weren't writing, what would you do? What would happen to you? He said, I'd go crazy. And I think that's pretty much your thing too, isn't it?
It is. And being a professional writer where this is all you do is actually very unusual in this country. It's just not something a lot of people do. And in order to do it, you either have to be a hugely successful person like David Baldacci, their books sell a lot of copies, or you have to be someone like me who diversifies and does a lot of different things in a lot of different genres. And that's what I've done. And I took a brief break. I took care of my mother who had Alzheimer's for a number of years. And so there were breaks in between writing. But by and large, I've just written lots of different things in order to be able to do this.
And you also write for both adults and young readers because there's that growth that comes that sometimes needs a nudge. And you definitely are out there nudging, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's why I do switch genres and I switch audiences because I'll think of something I want to say that might not be appropriate for one audience, but would be very appropriate for a different one. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to do that, switch back and forth between these different things. And I have editors I've worked with for 30 years. So I can go to one or the other of them and say, I have this idea. Would you be interested in this kind of a book?
Yeah. That makes a big difference having being able to do in a sense, what you want to do. And when the time comes, how important it is for you to be able to have that platform.
Exactly. And making a living from art is hard. It's hard for anybody, musicians, writers, visual artists, anybody. So you need that support network behind you who says, we believe in what you do and we want you to say this thing. And with Every Star That Falls, this book happened because my editor, Tara Wykeham at HarperCollins, said, we need to do this book. She didn't really say, are you interested in doing this book? Because
Yes.
people want.
You are freezing. I don't know if you know that or not, but
No,
you were,
am I
yeah,
back?
there you go. Yeah,
There we
you're
go.
back.
Yeah, we live in very rural Ohio, and I joked that if a squirrel breathes on the internet lines here, it freezes. So sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. Well, let's go into Every Star That Falls because I guess we should talk for those of our listeners who don't know anything about suicide notes. And then you pick it up, just you pick up Every Star That Falls just where it needs to be picked up. But I guess you knew that, right?
Well, it's weird because Suicide Notes, the previous book, takes place in a psychiatric hospital where this boy wakes up and doesn't know why he's there and has to figure it out. And it ends the day before he gets out. And then Every Star That Falls begins the day he gets out of the hospital and is driving home. But 15 years have gone by between writing these two books. So it was very strange to do that, to go back and say, oh, 15 years hasn't gone by in his life. It's the same day. That was the hardest part, was getting back into the mindset and going back to that moment.
Your humor helps get through this, though. I mean, even almost right from the very beginning, him kind of looking around and saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm in here with these people. Why?" In a sense, he knows why, but then going home to his mom, who is very anxious, and that's what motivates her. It's
His,
a whole different thing. You're freezing again.
it usually there we go. It usually lasts about 6 seconds when this happens.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first book happened because my editor at the time, who I'd worked with for many years, called me one day and she said, "This is going to sound weird, but you are the funniest writer I know, but you also deal with a ton of depression. What about writing a funny book about mental illness?" And I said, "Well, no, but now I am." And so we decided we were going to write a funny book about suicide and depression. Now, as you can imagine, this had a mixed response when it came out. People either were very into this idea or they were not into this idea. But the fact is, there are people who deal with intense trauma by looking at what is funny about it. And that's how I've always done it, because my attitude has been, I do not want to be swallowed up by despair. I do not want to be swamped by feelings of hopelessness. So, how can I get something funny out of this situation to help me move forward? And I've since found that there are a way that is funny, because that is how I would, well, that is how I did it. None of this is made up, but I was Jeff. I was that kid. And that is how I dealt with all of these things, was looking for the parts of it that were humorous. Because if you can make people laugh, you do two things. You remind them that they're alive, and you put them in a place where they're not scared of you. Or uncomfortable. They laugh, and they're then able to have the discussion that they need to have.
Right. Well, Jeff comes back and is looking for normalcy, but at the same time, he's grown to accept who he was or who he is sexually. Since it's loosely based on you, you had to find your comfort level for you too, didn't you?
I absolutely did. I grew up in a very rural place where there were no, as far as I knew, no other gay people. I grew up in a very religious environment all the way through college. I went to a Bible college.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so it wasn't until I was 20 years old and moved to New York City that I was able to even be a gay person. And I moved to New York City in 1988, which was not a super fun time to be a gay man coming out. And so my life has always been, as a gay person, from this position of, I don't want to say trauma, that makes it sound a little too dramatic, but a position of darkness. It's like, how can you be this person at a time and in a place where terrible things are happening to people like you? It was a very strange experience to have.
But at the same time, now I look at the more hopeful things that have come out. HIV and AIDS are not killing people anymore. People are able to have their careers. I still will always remember when Magic Johnson came out, and everybody was saying, "Oh my God, you know, we can't play with him. We can't do this." And everything's the flip, the switch flipped to make it comfortable. A number of other people did too. It was not the outcome has not been as dark. The doors have opened. Medications are out there to keep people alive and well, and they're able to find their humor in their lives again.
Yes, absolutely. A good friend of mine was one of the first people diagnosed with AIDS. He's still alive. Now, that's a lot of that is just biology and luck, right? He's lucky, but he's still here. A lot of people are not here. But yeah, things have changed, and social media happened, which is the other huge thing. Social media was not a thing when suicide notes came out at all. And now it is. So it was really interesting to bring Jeff into a world where I had to include those things. And it was also good because the teenagers in this book, relate to each other through social media, which is not something we had growing up at all. And it's really changed how people find each other and how they recognize that there are other people like themselves and how they express themselves. TikTok is fantastic. These well, not just young people, but particularly young people can have their voices heard and can be who they are visually and in a very accessible way, which is fantastic. It's free. Like you can just download TikTok and you have a platform to the entire world, or Instagram, or I don't know, whatever Twitter is called now. I don't know. All of these things. Yeah. It's just such a different world than it was when we were kids.
Yeah. But at the same time, I seem to find more young people not feeling, in a sense, as comfortable as they could be because they think their phones and their social media are their best friends,
Yes.
rather than really going out and being a part of a group, supportive activities. Because one of the things that you do is you really go out and support the LGBTQ community as well as activism.
Yeah, I really prefer in-person things. The problem with social media, it provides instant access to all of these things, but it's also very artificial because people want to present the best, most successful image of themselves online. And a lot of that is just simply not true. It's fake. And it's so easy to fake a life that looks perfect on Instagram and on Twitter and all these things. It's so easy to do that. And so not just young people, but particularly young people will see this and they're like, well, I don't look like that. I don't have that thing. I don't go to that exotic location. And they don't stop and think that maybe the person they're looking at isn't really doing that either, right?
Right.
The other part of it is it's so easy to criticize people online. It's instant. You can put a comment, you can put an emoji, you can send off a nasty remark to somebody because they're invisible. They're not in front of you. They're someone you see on your computer or on your phone. And so it's so easy to become wounded by these instant reactions to everything. Right. And if you're a young person, if you're a vulnerable young person who is kind of freaked out about how you look or what you are or any of those things, that hurts.
Yeah. One of the things you bring out in Every Star That Falls is Jeff seeks out a group of people through a counseling sort of thing that goes on, and the importance of really getting together with not only like minded people, but also people who can help you heal and move forward. And that's the one thing that, you talk about his good friend, Allie. and how he wants to reconnect with her and maybe her boyfriend too. But which I loved. But the need to have that real contact one on one.
Yes, you need real world friends. It's great to have online friends. It's great to have people, a community that you can interact with, but you need that daily, hopefully, connection with real people. And you also need that connection with people who are not like you. It's too easy now to just connect with people that you relate to. It's becoming harder and harder and harder for everybody to listen to people who are different from them because it's so easy to cut them off. Oh, I don't like what this person's saying. I'm not going to listen to their channel. I'm not going to watch their TikToks. I'm just going to tell them they suck, or I'm going to downvote them, or I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen more and more and more in everywhere.
Right. Exactly. But that's one of the things that you promote is especially with your uh, young readers' novels. You want them to find humor, you want them to find friends, and you want them to be curious.
I do. I want people to listen to each other. Um, Again, social media has made it super easy for us to get our opinions out and our voices out. But a lot of it is based along getting likes and getting comments and how many viewers can you get and how can you get your numbers up and how can you get a blue check mark or I don't know, whatever the current thing is. It's not really about listening to each other. And we've seen this politically, we've seen this in social issues. That gap is getting wider and wider and wider and wider because people are focusing on the things they want to hear and the things they want to say. So I really want to get young people to learn empathy and to learn what it means to listen to someone else's story, particularly when they're not like you and when you don't agree with them. Because that's how you find common ground and move forward as opposed to moving farther apart.
The other thing that got I get from your books also is learning how to accept themselves as they are and going on this search to identify who they are. Because I know people 50, 60, 70 years old who still are not really sure who they are. And it's kind of like the earlier they can learn it, the better life they're going to have.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 55 and I still spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to be when I grow up. You
I
know,
think you got a pretty good niche with the writing.
I'm
Okay.
trying, but I used to write a lot of nonfiction, and sometimes I will go back and read those books and just think, this is not me. I'm not this person anymore. And it's weird when something you've written, once it's out there and it's there forever. And it's weird when people read those books now and write to me, and it's hard to say to them, I'm not that guy anymore. Like I've moved on to this other thing. You know, when you're a writer and you've done it for 30 years, your growth is in the public domain. Like people can see what you said 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's always an interesting thing. And I was very fortunate. I was not the child my parents thought they were going to have. My father was a big sports star, and I couldn't tell you the difference between a field goal and a basket. You know, that was the big joke in gym class was don't ever give him the ball because he won't know what to do with it. My mother was very religious and wanted a religious child, and she did not get that. But they never once made me feel bad, ever, 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 ever. I don't think they had any idea what to do with me, but they never made me feel terrible for who I was. And that's the biggest gift you can give a child.
I think that's why maybe some adults and parents also need to read your books because the support is there. Like you were saying, mom with the anxiety and the religion and everything, but she never told you, no, you can't be, you can't do. it was an acceptance. And I hear so many parents, you know, trying to steer their kids the way they want to steer them, where you should be raising them to let them fly.
Yes, and that's exactly what Jeff's mother in the book has to learn. She's the way she is because she's afraid of what his life is going to be like. And I think this is a really important message for young people. Young people don't see their parents as people, they see them as parents. And I remember once I was on a train. My parents got divorced when I was in my 20s, and my mother did something spectacularly bizarre. She ran off with her married Baptist minister.
Much
And
for religion, huh?
yeah, exactly. And they were both married. Anyway, it's a long story, but my mother ran off with this minister, and I was on a train going back to where they lived to help my father deal with this. And I was telling the story to an older woman who was sitting next to me. And at the end of it, she said, well, of course, it's really none of your business what your mother does anyway, is it? And at the time, I was really angry because I was like, well, she's my mother and I'm her child. And of course, what she does affects me. But I very quickly realized what she meant, which is your mother's a person too. And this is her journey and it has nothing to do with you. And I think kids forget that their parents are humans and their parents have their own stories apart from them.
Yeah, very true. All right. As we look at every star that falls, I guess there's not going to be another one coming out after that, right?
There might be,
Oh,
might
as
be
Jeff
a,
continues to grow.
yeah, yeah. Well, something very unusual happens in this book, which I don't think has ever happened in a YA book, which is they form, well, I shouldn't give it away, but something happens in this book with a relationship. And I want to see where that goes. And I want to write about that. So we'll see if, if enough people want to know what happens, then maybe I'll get to do it.
Well, kind of like what happened with the other one. It's Suicide Notes. Suicide Notes forced you into Every Star That Falls.
Uh,
So maybe another one is coming. But let's talk about what else you're working on, because I didn't realize that you had also gone on a Nanda Plume, Isabel Bird.
oh,
Let's
Isabel.
talk about that.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So my first big writing job was a 15-book series called Circle of Three. That was the name of the series, Circle of Three. And it was about three girls who are studying witchcraft, but it wasn't Harry Potter kind of witchcraft. It was very real world witchcraft. And again, it was an accident. The same editor who got me to do Suicide Notes called me up one day and she said, ugh, I need to find someone to write a series about witches. And I was like, I'll do it. And she's like, great. This is your come up with something. And so I sent her a proposal and they did. They signed it up. And so for a year, I wrote that series.
Wrote that whole series in 1 year?
We did one book a month.
My goodness.
Yeah, it was horrible. it was a lot
It's
of fun.
pretty intense.
It was very intense. The first couple were fun, and then it was like, oh, I have another one due in 30 days, and it was a very long
Yeah.
project. It was a long,
Yeah.
I guess it was 15 months, 15 or 18 months by the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, just like Suicide Notes, those books came out and they didn't really do anything. They kind of came and went. But now I am getting letters from people who said, my mother read those books when she was a teenager and gave them to me. Someone just wrote to me and said, my grandmother read those books and gave them to me. And so they've developed this weird, almost cult following, mostly from women who read them when they were teenagers, which is fantastic. It's this weird thing.
Oh, well, I was reading your bio and things like that, and you like the Doctor Who and tarot cards and things like that. Was that some of the inspiration behind that too?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I'm into I love Doctor Who and tarot cards.
Yep, this was all stuff I was into, and I don't really remember the details of why we did Circle of Three. There was a series out called Sweep, I think, at the time that was about girls who were witches, and it was doing well. And I think that was, whenever something's successful, publishers are like, "Hey," but they wanted something that was more realistic. That series is more fantasy oriented, and they wanted something that was very rooted in what actual teenagers interested in these topics would be doing.
Yeah.
That's what
And then you tarried off to Jane Austen and a little
happened.
witchcraft there too. See, I've
Well,
done my homework, huh?
so that was very funny. So I was on the phone one day with my agent, and he was complaining, and he said, "Ugh, the only things selling these days are Jane Austen and vampires." And this light bulb went off, and I said, "Give me an hour." And I wrote this proposal for what if Jane Austen was living in the modern times as a vampire? What would it be like? And I'll never forget this. I wrote the proposal, and I went off on a scuba diving trip in Alaska. I was on a boat in Alaska for 10 days with no access to my phone. And we came back, and I got off, and I turned on my phone, and there were about 50 messages from him saying, "You have to call me immediately." And he had sent out this proposal, and there was a bidding war for it. And it was the first time in my life that it happened. And yeah, it was so much fun to come back to
People really need to check you out because
that. I do.
I mean, seriously, it's like I can't. I'll be honest, I'd never heard of you, but now I started looking through your, I guess, bibliophiles and saw how much you have written, and I'm going, I'm interested in that. I want to read about that. I want to see this, and even some of the young adult novels seem interesting enough because I'm a reader. And I learned so much from reading, but so much of yours also has humor, which draws people in. And I just, I was like, I want to go and hang out with you to make me laugh.
Well, I'm interesting. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have all of these books, but none of them have ever been bestsellers. And so you're right. Most people don't know who I am. A lot of times, what will happen is someone will meet me or read a book, and they're like, "Oh, I have read that book." And my name is so common too that you don't think about it. Like David Baldacci, there's one of him, but there's a bunch of Michael Fords out there. And so people don't really associate my name, but sometimes they'll remember the title of a book, and they'll be like, "Oh, you wrote that." Like the Circle of Three books, which even
Mhm.
weren't even under my name, or the Jane Austen books, or years ago I wrote a series that was based on a TV show called Erie, Indiana, um, which is probably the most fun thing I've ever done. And people know that TV show, but they don't know who Mike Ford is. That's the name they put on those, was Mike Ford. That's even more boring than Michael Thomas Ford. So yeah, you're right. People might remember a book, but they won't connect the name to it.
Right. All right. Well, listen, it's been so much fun talking with you. I have to ask what's coming up. This one's out, but
Uh,
I know there's more coming from you.
there is. I am currently finishing. I write a lot of ghost. I write a lot of ghost stories and haunted doll books for Scholastic for their book fairs. The
Yeah.
school book fairs.
Yeah.
So I write those, and again, they're under the name Mike Ford, so people don't really know it's me. So the next up is a book about a haunted doll, which is a ton of fun. And then I have an adult thriller that I'm working on that I don't know when that'll be out, probably 2025. And something else. Maybe the next in the Suicide Note series. That might be
Okay.
happening.
Well, I'm gonna keep an eye on you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Somebody has to.
Oh, listen, it has been so much fun talking to you, as I knew it would be. And many thanks to five-time Lambda Literary Award-winning author Michael Thomas Ford, also known as Mike Ford. His latest novel is Every Star That Falls. It's available through his website, michaelthomasford.com. Once again, that's michaelthomasford.com. Check it out, folks. A lot of good stuff there. Amazon and also other locations, he's available there. Michael is also on social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram. Until next time, seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.